Cheers and welcome to our inaugural episode of Grains on Tap, presented by Grain Growers of Canada in collaboration with Beer Canada. I'm Kyle Larkin, Executive Director of Grain Growers of Canada, and your host and guide as we dive into policies and beer. Grains on Tap is not your typical policy podcast. We're opening the doors of Parliament Hill, sitting down with the powerhouses of Canadian agriculture and policy making. We plan to chat with the movers and shakers in agriculture policy, ranging from members of parliament and senators to government relations professionals, to bring you an inside look into everything ag happening inside the good old Ottawa bubble. And here's the twist. We're doing it over some great craft beer. As we explore agriculture policy, we'll also be raising a glass to the growers and brewers from across the country. Whether you're a fourth generation farmer, a policymaker navigating the halls of Parliament Hill, or just someone curious about the heartbeat of agriculture in Ottawa, you're in the right place. So grab your favorite beer, kick back, and let's cultivate a deeper understanding of the policies that shape our fields on Grains on Tap. Our first guest really needs no introduction for grain farmers. Branden Leslie is the Member of Parliament for Portage-Lisgar and a Grain Growers of Canada alumnus. Hailing from Portage La Prairie in Manitoba, Branden has devoted his career to the intersection of agriculture and politics, boasting a wealth of experience as a political advisor. Elected to the House of Commons in June of last year through a by-election, Branden's journey from being the Manager of Policy and Government Relations with GGC to elected office brings a unique perspective. We're really excited to have him as our first guest. Welcome, Branden. How are you doing?
Thanks, Kyle. It's an honor, I'd say a fitting honor, to be the first guest here, and I really am glad you're continuing the tradition of talking ag over beer, because it just makes a lot of sense. So happy to be here. I'm in Ottawa. I just finished the House of Commons for the day, and hustled over to kick back with you, enjoy a beer, and talk a little ag. So excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on a late Friday afternoon. Before we dive into it, you're a recent father. I want to ask you, how are you doing in that new role, and how's your family?
Yeah, thank you. I am. This lighting actually might help with the bags under my eyes, obviously, as any parent knows out there, and I'm quickly learning sleep is something that doesn't come by so easy at the moment. But no, we are over the moon. I'm wrapped around my little daughter, Maeve Grace's finger. We had a couple challenges after birth, but she is healthy and growing and adorable, and it's been a heck of a journey. And Kaylee and we're just so excited, and it's just been such a blessing. Just can't get over it, and trying to balance between work and family, and so far I think doing a reasonable job of that. But recognizing that family does come first, and trying to make sure that I'm going to be a good dad and a hands-on dad.
Well, congratulations. I don't think there's a more important role than that. I'd say even more important than Member of Parliament and everything else you got going on in your life. And I can definitely say, from grain farmers across Canada, congratulations. Uh, let's dive into it. I want to start off by talking about the beers we're enjoying today. I'll kick us off. I am enjoying a great oat cream IPA from my friends at Stray Dog Brewing. Stray Dog Brewing is they're based in Orleans here in Ottawa. I chose this beer primarily because it represents two commodities instead of one. Obviously, you have the barley in the beer, but you also have the oat. So I had to give a shout out to the oat growers out in the prairies. I'm a big IPA guy, so it's definitely no surprise that I've chosen an IPA. Branden, what are you drinking with us today?
Well, you've one up me with the oat inclusion. I went with a local Ottawa beer here. It's Landlocked IPA by Overflow Brewery. I brought two beers as well. I brought one just because it looked like a cool beer that I might sample a little of each of during a chat. It's called Popper's Golden Lager, and the reason I grabbed it is it's the official beer of Letterkenny. I'm not sure what that means. I don't know if that makes it a good beer, but I figured I would try that. So, and it's I think also an Ontario based beer. So I figured I'd sample a little of each. I'm in Ontario, might as well try some of theirs, and I'll share that IPA start with you.
Well, I may have went up to you on the two commodities, but you went up to me on two beers. So I think we're even at the end of the day here.
Deal.
So I think, most folks listening to this pod will know that you were raised on a farm. You were raised on a farm in Portage-Lisgar. Tell me a bit and tell us a bit about how was that like growing up there?
Yeah, I mean, I think like most people that, particularly in the folks we represent, I still catch myself. I say we a lot, as if I'm still representing farmers and the associations that grain growers represent, and I think that's a good thing, though. But I'd say idyllic period growing up, small town, living out in the country. I was an only child, so I spent a lot of time outside, a lot of time with dad around the farm. Didn't see myself becoming a farmer. Relatively kind of that mid-teenage. Largely, I had a heck of a time with wheat dust, to be honest with you, and so it was a bit of a battle come harvest. So always involved in the farm, just not kind of the full cycle of it. But yeah, just the typical small town living. And one of the things that I'm so proud to represent in this new role is that lifestyle, and that's what I kind of campaign on, is the rural way of life. And so many of the folks I'm sure listening to this, and the folks that you represent at grain growers and the producers across Canada, they understand it. We're the typical prairie town, flat as a tabletop, and some great land, and just real proud of where I've come from.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And you've kind of come full circle now as the member of parliament for there. But what was your first introduction to politics? What inspired you to get into, politics, lobbying, advocacy? How'd you get to where you are?
It's a good question. I'll try to give you a slightly truncated answer. In short, just by accident. I really wasn't involved in politics as a kid. I like most people. I mean, most people don't really pay attention to politics until they start getting their checks with the first job and realizing how much money is taken off it, and then all of a sudden you have a little bit more interest in politics. And so for me, that was kind of in university. I was going to Branden University, taking business, had a couple of political courses, and kind of piqued my interest, and honestly just random strings of events almost, where I had a friend that urged me to apply to the Conservative Party internship in Ottawa in 2010. And at that time, I was kind of not a lost kid, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought I was going to maybe go take over the farm, maybe sell insurance in Portage. I had no idea. I was just having fun at university and decided to take a leap, applied, got in, and moved to Ottawa for what I thought was going to be a summer. And loved it. Realized that this politics thing and policy was very interesting, and I was fortunate to have some really good bosses early on. That's one of the things I think that matters a lot in politics, is who you kind of get, like who you're associated with. And like any other job, there's good bosses and bad bosses, and good guys in politics and the others. And Laurie Hahn was my first boss, and just had a great mentor, one of the good guys of politics. A guy that everybody really respected, and went on opportunities with the Minister of Public Safety. So I came for a summer, and I just didn't really leave. And I kind of was just given opportunities and seeing, I ended up taking a degree in political science from Carleton. And much like most social science degrees, they don't really teach you much. You don't learn a lot about politics by taking politics in school. You learn by on the job. And whether that be policy or kind of the actual functions of government, you can learn the theories, the fundamentals of belief structures in school. And maybe you learn what some of those you really disagree with are, particularly in today's university campuses. But there was no grand plan. It just kind of kept falling into opportunities, and I like to think was a pretty good staffer at the time, and was able to rekindle my love for agriculture after the 2015 election. I was helping Larry McGuire on that campaign in Brandon, and then I was working for the Minister of Public Safety. We all get fired. When the government changes, you're all fired, which is very humbling, a very humbling experience. And I was able to get on with Robert Sopak, who was the MP for Dauphin Swan River Nipawin, real salt of the earth, good guy, fisheries biologist, a true conservationist, founded the Conservative Hunting and Angling Caucus, was a farmer in a previous life, was also worked in environmental stewardship in the oil sands, just a whole host of different careers, and was able to teach me a lot and really rekindled my love of the natural resource community, land-based solutions, and modern farming practices, and the benefits that can be derived from that, and the importance of maintaining those rural communities. So I owe a lot to Bob in kind of putting me on the course to agriculture. And I politics has a best before date, or you just get tired, right? It is a tough slog as a staffer, and I'm sure I'll learn over the months and years as an MP. It's no different. So I decided I wanted to get out, but I wanted to do it targetedly, in targeted way, I should say. And so I read. That's why I ended up at the grain growers. I wanted to go there. I wanted to get back and fight for, not just my family, but the folks that I know and love back home, and knowing that it's just like that across the country. So I was very intentional in joining the Grain Growers of Canada. I think I talked to then executive director, your predecessor, Aaron Gowerlick, about a year before. They had a posting, and I said, I'm not leaving yet, because I was going to run Candace Bergen's campaign in Portage-Lisgar in 2019. And you can't plan things until they just kind of happen. And I got a call after that election, and she said, well, this job is reopened. You'd be interested? I said, yes, this is perfect. Let me out of politics. Did a terrible job of staying out, evidently. But yeah, and it was something I really wanted to do, was work with and for farmers and try to advance our interests in a time that the government, from my perspective, and I can say this now, obviously with grain growers, I was nonpartisan. People knew where I worked before, but that's, as you well know, Kyle, you work with the government of the day. So I can be a little more partisan now that I'm in this
Absolutely.
chair. But I just got really, really frustrated. And so that's part of the reason I kind of decided, well, maybe I could just put my name on a ballot, and maybe I'd be able to do a little bit more on the inside, just that collection of experiences I've had. And thankfully, I was humbled to get the support of folks in the nomination back home, and then in the by-election. So, no grand plan, no, oh, I'm a 12-year-old that's going to be the prime minister. None of that. It's just been, I don't know. You take the opportunities when they come, and don't be scared to take a chance every now and then, I guess.
Yeah, great points. And I think the greatest politicians that give years of public service are those that never really plan to get into it. They had great careers beforehand, and now they're in politics, applying their trade, be it science, farming, military service, whatever it is. They're applying it now to public service. That's how we can make our democracy better. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, I mean, that's the
yeah,
thing. Like with grain growers, and it's not just an empty plug. Like I love my job at grain growers. I wasn't like, oh, I want to leave. It
right.
was a great group of people, a great organization, had really made some strong developments, and a good job. It's something, job enjoying your job matters. And for every moment of my time at Grain Growers, I loved it. I loved every part of it. So leaving actually was thinking about leaving. That was a big hindrance. But I appreciate your points there, that you don't. I don't know if the best politicians are ones that know they're going to be politicians.
Well, you mentioned it. We miss you. We miss you here at Grain Growers, but we're happy to see you. Happy to see you in the house. You're obviously a great champion for grain farmers. But you mentioned a bit about you never really plan to get into politics. And, I certainly had a similar journey. I just got scooped up by those who were super passionate. I went to the University of Ottawa. So, once you start getting involved with certain people, they kind of scoop you up into it. But it is funny what you said. You don't learn a lot in university that you actually apply to politics. I read a lot of Aristotle and Plato and other philosophers, Karl Marx. There's not a lot of that application to our day-to-day lives, right? But
Exactly.
it's really those skills that you take from it. Look, you're coming up on your first year here as member of parliament in a few months. What would you say your most memorable moments and challenges have been so far? Any surprises along the way?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it's been a wild year. When I think back, January 14th is when I announced I was running for the nomination in Portage-Lisgar, which I guess just over a year ago. And since then, we won a by-election, got married, had a kid. It's been a wild year. So to hear that it's coming up on here, I got a few months still, but
Few months.
it's been. I'm fortunate in the sense that, having worked on the Hill, you understand the way this place works, and I think that, for me, that was part of my selling, part of my pitch when working particularly for the nomination, is, do you want somebody that can actually do things quickly because they know how this place works, or do you want somebody that's going to take 3 years? Because I'll tell you, there's MPs that, if you come from no partisan politics, no party politics, and no understanding of the federal government, you're going to struggle to find the cafeteria, never mind try to advance the interests of your constituents in any meaningful
Right.
way. And for better or worse, that's just kind of the way it is. And so I certainly made that a part of my selling point in the nomination. But all that said, it's allowed me to have a better understanding of what to expect. That said, when you're a staffer, you're not the boss. You're not managing, multiple staff and multiple offices and multiple provinces and dealing with all of the challenges of that. Particularly as you start up an office. I know I was fortunate to take over some of the staff from Candace that stayed with me, which is good for the transition. But so that side of things was somewhat eye opening. The riding side. It's a lot of fun. It's maybe I'll get used to it, but and it's I guess my own fault when I send pictures of my dumb face on flyers out to people. They start to recognize you. So when you're kind of out around town or at an event and like kind of giving you that stare, like, is that guy? Is that new guy? And most people come up and they either say something or don't. But so there's kind of the very minute parts of the day-to-day living, particularly when you're back home, that are a little bit different. But I mean, the most memorable for me, obviously, I would say winning the by-election. Like it's just it's crazy flows of emotion. It's a safe conservative seat, but we we did not take it for granted. I was running against a political party leader.
Yep.
In
You want to
the
call
in
it
the
that.
yeah, exactly. I'm glad you said it. I didn't have to. And so that it was a bigger that campaign was bigger than me. There was a lot of attention paid to this random South Central Manitoba riding because he was there, and that was his chance to beat this guy that nobody knows. And we worked our tail off, and I had a great team and a lot of support from folks on the ground and donors and volunteers and yeah, politicians often say, I can't, this is because of all the people around me. And I never was sure if that was just a platitude, but that was, those are the moments I'm like, no, this is true. This is everybody around me that made me. I just happen to be the guy with the name on my sign. So that real humbling experience at both the nomination and the by-election was pretty remarkable. And then, walking into the House of Commons for the first time, arm in arm with Pierre Poilievre, our next Prime Minister of Canada, and my good friend Larry Maguire from the riding next door, I've known for years, with this stupid grin on my face, and it's just a blur. And so, as much as it's memorable, I guess I don't know if I fully remember it, but at least I got video proof of it. But I've been given so many opportunities since. I've been pleasantly surprised at the amount of times I've been able to ask questions in QP and do SO31s, and be fairly active on the parliamentary front. And I think it just is a benefit of having spent a lot of time there and knowing kind of the way that part works. So it's been a wild ride. Never going to be what you expect, but it's been a lot of fun and a lot of work, and so far absolutely worth it.
Wild ride indeed. What a year you've had. You mentioned it very quickly, but I want to dig into it a bit. You're riding there in Portage-Lisgar, fairly safe conservative seat. But the nomination was never a guarantee for you. Certainly you had a pitch nomination battle. Can you talk a little bit about how that was and how that came about?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I was up against, there was, I think, at the end, four or five people on the ballot, one of which was a former MP from Winnipeg. It was a bit of an odd mix. Good guy, but it wasn't really from the area. Another couple of local folks, and then the big name candidate that on paper everybody expects to win was then Minister of Finance Cam Friesen, who resigned as minister, and his seat to run against me in the nomination I'd announced 3 weeks before. And like I said, on paper, I don't win that. And nominations are an interesting game. They're about selling memberships and getting people to show up to vote. This is not amongst the general population. You have to be a member, and you have to be a member for long enough to actually be eligible to vote. And so it took a lot of hard work. I stood in a lot of shops, and agriculture was absolutely my benefit. The fact I could speak with, I'd say, quite a bit of authority, and I'd find a farmer that I knew in X area of the riding, and tell bring hopefully 15, 20 neighbors, and that nominations, I think, I'm sure for everybody, what a wildly fun experience if you're interested in this little world anyways. I would do a little pitch, just like who I am, what I've been doing, and for 10 minutes or so, and stand in a circle with 20 people around me and just take questions for an hour, 2 hours about anything under the sun. So you got to be thinking on your feet. It's pretty exhausting actually, because people rightfully want to know what you believe, what you think, what you're going to do, and you're selling yourself. You're not the conservative candidate. You're not selling the brand. You're not selling Pierre. You're selling you and what you can do. And so I spent a lot of time on shop floors, having coffees with guys and just hearing what they had to say. And I thankfully I think they appreciated that I at least seemed to know what I was talking about, particularly in ag stuff and a few other file issues as well. And so thankfully I came out on top fairly handily in the nomination battle, and it bleeds into why my opponent in the by-election was Maxime Bernier. Um, he he didn't expect me to win. He was expecting to be running against somebody very different. In fact, the guy that was the Minister of Health during the COVID lockdowns, and he was going to take that angle. So
They would have loved
I
that.
he that's what he wanted to run against, and so
Yeah.
that made a pretty big impact, because I obviously I wasn't in charge of the provincial government, and had some fairly different views on those matters. So that changed that dynamic too. So yeah, it was one of those ones on paper. I don't think people expected me. I've had a few people after that, people I've worked with, people I know, they're like, yeah, I thought you were a little crazy. I didn't think you had a chance of winning. And, it's hard work. It's lonely. It's not fun. You're on the road by yourself. It's not a fun thing. But so far, like I say, worth it. And hopefully those folks that bought memberships, they paid $15 of their own money, and showed some people drove an hour and a half on a Saturday morning because they couldn't get there on the Friday to vote for me. And what a feeling. Why would somebody do that for you?
Right.
It's so humbling, and I guess it just makes me more proud that those are the sorts of people that I am so happy to serve. I'm going to serve everybody, but that level of support, it just meant so much to me.
Awesome. Yeah, the humbleness definitely comes through. Let's dive into a bit of this Ottawa bubble that's always a love-hate relationship. But the elephant in the room, or I guess in Ottawa for grain farmers, is Bill C-234. You obviously have a long history with this bill. You are one of the original architects, so I don't need to explain to you what this bill is. But this time last year, you were advocating for this bill through Grain Growers of Canada, and now you're voting on it as a member of parliament. Kind of come 360 here
Yeah.
with the new session coming back now and the bill back in the House of Commons from the Senate. Where do you see it going?
Yeah. And yeah, that's been a wild full circle. Um, and I appreciate the recognition. Yeah, and we worked on Bill C-206 with Phil Lawrence before too. Like, this has been
Right.
a long time in the making. The previous one was just grain drying. We expanded it to include livestock heating and cooling, and we did a great job. I would say, and colleagues across the Ag Carbon Alliance, Dave Carey and I we basically, I think we're in Calgary when the list of PMB folks came out, and we started calling people, and I was like, Ben Lobb, I think, is the guy. I know a staffer. I think he's the right guy to do this. People like him. He's not crazy partisan, because that was an important part of this. Is it had to be non-partisan. We needed support of everybody but the Liberals. We knew we weren't going to get the Liberals, and so, as I said earlier, my job with grain growers, just as yours is, it doesn't matter what your previous politics are. It matters what you're saying now, and you're advocating for what in this case is good policy, not just good for farmers, but when you can't transition to a different fuel source. I might disagree with the entirety of the carbon tax, but in this case, even the Greens agree to this. We got the support of all parties, folks from all parties, including some Liberals. And so, to see it is, I was looking at this when I got elected, knowing I wasn't planning on voting this bill. It was off to the Senate. They were going to pass it. I was looking, I was like, this is a feather in my cap. Right away, I'm an MP, and I'd be like, no, I already did this. I wasn't an MP then, but
Mhm.
I was pretty important in starting this whole process. And then to see it just fall apart thanks to political games. I can't express to you how mad I've been. And there's one way. If I was simply politically crass, you could look at this and be like, hey, from my conservative standpoint, I can harp on the government all, an extra month or 9 months or 2 years about this. I don't want that. I want the hundreds of millions of dollars of savings next year. And so to see this fall apart, um, in a Senate, like, the Senate's not elected. We were elected. I didn't vote on it, but our chamber voted on this bill with bipartisan, multi-partisan support. And to see it got political right when it was the home heating announcement on the East Coast, when they exempted heating oil it's 3% of Canadians get a carbon tax. That's when all of a sudden, when that opportunity of, and it's not to say the Conservatives, we haven't politicized this too. Don't get me wrong. That all of a sudden started. Oh, this carve out. You did one carve out. Why can't you do it for farmers? And I gave a speech. One of my earliest speeches, actually. I think one of my first lines was, "I can't believe I'm standing here in the House giving a speech, telling that the motion was for the Senate to do what the House said it should do by passing this legislation, which it's duly elected chamber passed." I couldn't. It was so surreal standing there. It was fun in one sense, but so much more. It was frustrating. And so, just in terms of kind of where it goes from here, I nobody knows. We're in a weird legislative limbo. So in fact, like the standing orders don't state how this works. The Senate, since the Liberals appointed the so-called independent, which in this case, I'll say it, they are not. Guilbeault was calling senators, PMO was calling senators. Just because they don't have Liberal in their name, they don't caucus them, doesn't mean that they're not friendly to at a minimum, because some of the who moved these amendments after they were already denied in the Senate at the committee of the whole, or in the Senate chamber after they were passed at the committee stage. There, we have nothing to do with ag. They have no connection to ag, and they don't try to tell me that they're trying to make this bill better, because that is just horse. Like, I don't know if I can swear in the podcast, but it's baloney.
Open that.
I guess this is the first one. We'll set the precedent.
Yeah, that's right. We make the rules
It
here.
was absolute horseshit. And so where it stands now with it coming back, normally the Senate's amended a number of government bills, but the government controls their own agenda in the House of Commons. They can move time allocation. They can get that bill up for a vote again and send it back. And the Senate, the second time, will acquiesce and pass it. That's been the case for every other time this has happened. It hasn't happened for PNBs. So it's just in this limbo that there's no direction, there's no time limit. As long as the government keeps putting up speakers, is my understanding, they can just keep running the clock out. And it's so disappointing. And the easy thing to let it pass, because then the issue goes away. And if I'm a liberal political pundit, I say just let it go, because we're hammering on you because it's part of a larger narrative on the carbon tax. Like, if I were them, I'd kick part of the stool out. But I'm on a different team than them. But at the end of the day, we have been trading up within our caucus to make sure that it continues to be debated, that gives it a chance to go to a vote. Obviously, with the hope of amending it. My understanding, and hopefully my Bloc colleagues aren't listening and I'm wrong, is that they might want to accept the amendments. So it would go back in a different form, which would be terribly disappointing to our livestock producers that are, depending on the type of operation, paying tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in the carbon tax. So, again, sorry for the long answer to a short question. Nobody really knows, but I'm not really quietly. In fact, I asked 2 questions in QP related to this today. I am very much pushing that we just get this done. Get the politics out of this. Save farmers $1 billion. The argument that farmers can reinvest that money in their operation to have a larger, obviously economic benefit, but more importantly, reinvestments in their own operation for sustainability improvements to their overall profile. That is a good argument. It's true. It's unfortunately falling on deaf ears. But if you actually care about the environment, that is the best thing you can do. And I just hate that politics is getting in the way of this after we've made such good progress on what is just good policy.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you would know the farmer I'm talking about, but there's a farmer in Manitoba that I spoke to recently. He's looking to buy a new grain dryer. His grain dryer is 10 to 20 years old. The new grain dryer that he's looking to buy, it cost him about $400,000, but it would save him 30% on fuel, which means it would save him 30% on costs, and it would also save 30% emissions. That's one of the messages that I think the government has had a challenge of understanding. We've been talking a lot about obviously the cost, the bills and the carbon tax costs. But the other thing too is these farmers are looking to save capital so they can invest in the next best innovations and technologies and equipment. You've been on that farm. You've been in this role. You understand that. I know that. But it's a challenge. And look, I was just talking to a senator this morning. We talked about the politicking that happened in the Senate around 234. He said it's the first time in a long time that he's seen that level of politicking in the Senate. And I think most of us who follow politics would agree with that. It's certainly, in my almost decade of advocacy and lobbying and political engagement, I've never seen the Senate that politically involved on a private member's bill. It was quite amazing to watch, and it's a little disappointing. So obviously the hope is to get 234 passed as soon as possible in the House, and appreciate you and your colleagues working getting it up in the order of precedence. Want to talk a little bit about your role on the House of Commons and Environment Committee. I know you would have loved to be on the Agriculture Committee, but I think a lot of your colleagues also would love to be on that committee. It's a highly oversubscribed committee for your side of the House, but you're on the Environment Committee, which is equally as important. As a member, in the hopes of bringing an agriculture perspective to that committee, through your committee role and agricultural background, how do you see the sector contributing to this policy area?
Yeah, no, you're right. When I made my requests, and I'm the new guy, right? So I don't hold a lot of sway in where I get to go. And there's senior folks that are very capable that certainly want to be on the Ag Committee. Obviously, I was my first on the list, but environment I think might have been my second or third actually.
Okay.
I'm pretty happy to be on that committee most of the time. Caveat that a little bit. You're right, and I appreciate. And it's funny you mentioned bringing the ag lens, and I most certainly have. And I looked at that Open Parliament website a while back there, and it says your most commonly used word in Parliament, and so far it's farmer, which I guess should come as no surprise, and is
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great thing, and of no surprise. Um, the environment, big picture, this government has a complete obsession with CO2 emissions above all else. It's uh, lazy environmental policy on such a regular basis. I've actually met with a little bit outside ag, but undoubtedly actually will touch ag a little bit. The single-use plastics ban, and there's about four other consultations ongoing on different other polymers that they're looking at banning and changing that are going to drive up prices of food and just crazy ideas that are just about sounding good. Not to say that there's not totally problems with plastic pollution, but I feel like our nation or our government regularly tries to shoulder the weight of the world's problems like they're all our fault, and simultaneously never promotes the good things that we do. The amount of you mentioned some of the tech that guys are looking to invest in, whether it be dryers or anything else.
Yeah.
Our improvements in emissions in terms of what the ag sector have been tremendous. We are so much better than the rest of the world, and we act like we're a bad thing. To me, it's kind of a mindset that is the initial problem, and that mindset leads to incredibly frustrating priorities and policies. Now, the reality is that we're not going to be able to get ahead or solve or stop some of those, from my committee job anyways, or more broadly. And the environment is an important issue to a lot of people, and rightfully so. Listen, I am all for taking action that actually helps improve environmental indicators, whether that be on farm or the status of our wetlands, of our biodiversity. I am entirely in favor of that, but that doesn't mean you should do things that sound good that don't do anything or are actually detrimental. And I think that that's what we see, particularly in agriculture. And we've seen this story play out already in Europe, and the fact that we always look to Europe for not just ag, but a whole bunch of policies. Oh, they're doing this in Europe. In the case of ag, they are now a net food importer instead of a net food exporter. Their food prices are incredibly high as a proportion of their income in that sector alone. And then, of course, the energy issues that they've had and the reliance on gas from Russia. At the time, we have Russia invading Ukraine. Like, there's just that their policies aren't good. The model of the EU is crazy because you have a bunch of bureaucrats basically decide how things happen, and then our bureaucrats 7 years later decide that they're good ideas, or our politicians at the behest of our bureaucrats think they're a good idea. That doesn't mean we should just do them. Like, let's think logically and rationally, and most importantly, talk to farmers. So I have the benefit, I'd say, on the ag side of coming freshly from talking to a lot of farmers, and that will continue. But yeah, I push some buttons on the ag committee. I have not made many friends on the other side of the table, and I'm okay with that because if you're from Toronto or somewhere near Toronto and you're a vegan and you think you know everything about farming and you talk like you do, do you talk down to guys like me? because you think that, oh, farmers care about climate change. Of course they do, but you don't know that better than I do. And it is extremely frustrating. So I'm a bit feisty on the Ag Committee, and I think that's a good thing. I think that if we can put forward good, coherent arguments, which our sector most definitely has in terms of the evidence of the work that we have done and will continue to do in terms of our environmental and sustainability improvements. So without, I have some good colleagues, Dan Mazer, another Manitoba MP, former farmer himself, on the Ag Committee. I try to ground it in the natural resource and in rural communities, because we are an afterthought for the most part, and this is one of those last lines of defense. And I just think whenever we can raise this, the issues that I think the folks that I represent, anyways, in the rural Canada more broadly, to bring those to the fore, at least so that individual MP across the way, they might hate me for it, they might disagree with me, they might think whatever about me. I don't really care, because I need to say what I know the folks that I'm here to represent would want me to say.
You kept saying Ag Committee instead of Environment Committee, so I feel like your
Ah,
subconscious is telling you you're on the Ag Committee.
sorry. Yeah, it's well, I'm trying to make it the Ag Committee, right? We
That's
get
fair.
lost in some of the other dynamics. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
bring the two together.
Yeah. But you hit the nail on the head. I mean, one of the things I've learned since joining Grain Growers of Canada is grain farmers at the forefront of climate change. You just look back at this summer. You had the forest fires hitting many parts of the prairies, and you had a lot of farmers almost all across the prairies, mostly in the southern portions, experiencing near drought conditions. Right? The some of the growing conditions this year haven't been the best because we just haven't gotten the rain. We haven't gotten the moisture that we need. You know that, but we need to bring that message to Ottawa as much as possible because a lot of folks that haven't been on a grain farm just don't understand it.
And you're bang on. And I've lately, the government. I'm sorry to. I'm not trying to be partisan. I just get frustrated, particularly on this issue. Um, but part of the reason I ran is I would say, I won't put a percentage on it, but it was gene editing and the process of consultation and approvals of regulatory structure for gene edited commodities in this country,
Right.
in the aftermath of other countries or competitor nations approving and providing guidance so that they could be developed in those countries. Seeing the way that went about, because I'm hearing these comments in the House today. I think I heard a couple of somebody said, like, last year was the worst wheat yields ever, and like just statements. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to go check that, because I think you're just making stuff up at this point. Like I don't know where you're getting your facts from, for starters. But listen, yeah, we have in my writing, the drought map is awful. When you look at the drought map, south central Manitoba, it's dark brown. It's not good, and we have no snow right now. We got a little bit of rain, but it's frozen ground. It's not going to sink in. We need a wet April, and and we also need irrigation. Like we need there's roles for the government to play to try to improve the situation so that we can increase those yields. But going back to the gene editing piece, and I can't, I'm not a scientist. I don't know if it's going to happen. But if we could have nitrogen fixing cereals, that's the best thing we could ever do
Absolutely.
to reduce our overall emissions profile as a sector in this country. And the fact that we're intentionally holding that up at the behest of these radical eco groups, and then saying that farmers need to do X and X and X and these little practice changes, working around the edges, that is not following the evidence. That is not following the science. And that talking out of both sides of your mouth it was incredibly frustrating to me. And then to have folks that don't know ag try to throw these stats out at me about ag, I'm like, you don't understand how much we've improved drought resistance, moisture resistance in our seed variety development already, and how much we could be unleashing, and how much more we could be doing. But first of all, you got to give farmers credit for what they have done, and the companies involved in the sector, and the research that's undertaken. I try to express this again, going back to the environment committee, like you don't understand how advanced and how scientific this sector is until you go and see there. And or till you sit in a highboy and see nozzles turn off as the GPS coordinates align, that you're not overlapping your crop protection product application. Until you see that, or you go to Ag Days, even like see any of this, you don't know.
Yeah.
And to stand in the way of what that next thing that could do both good for our yields, for our communities that are supported by those yield increases, for that resilience in the face of climate change, because your buddies in Montreal think it's a bad idea. I have no time for that. And that was one of the little tipping points for me that just frustrated me to no end.
Absolutely. Deep breaths, my friend. Deep breaths.
Sorry,
I'm sure you
you're
have
getting me
stress
going.
relieving practices you have there in the house.
Yeah, you're getting me
Look,
going, Kyle. I
yeah,
love it
we're
though. I
running low on
appreciate it.
time here. I just want to hit you with one last question, which
Sure.
is what's some other, you've touched on a lot here. We've touched on a lot, but what are some other policy areas that our listeners should keep an eye out for in 2024 as it relates to ag?
Ooh, that's a good question. If I were to be honest, not much. Just given who's the government just isn't focused on trade. They're not focused on improving rail corridors or port efficiencies. These are just not. They're. I don't think they're anywhere on the radar, and that's certainly um, not because folks like yourself and all these other national ag groups aren't trying day in day out to put them on the radar.
Right.
We're just at a point where this government is nearing its end of days. It's running on steam. It's thinking about politics, not policy. I mean, you see this in the prime minister talking about Donald Trump all the time. What's that going to do to our international relations with our largest trading partner? Like for a simple example, we're at a point where I worry that our priorities, not that they ever were priorities of this government, they're just not going to get grabbed onto. That said, I think that, and it may be touching on the question I didn't answer last time about the Environment Committee and what you guys can do is, and I've been inviting groups to wherever I can, a water study from the ag community to try to come and bring those perspectives to that committee. We just got to keep doing what we're doing. I know the government's kind of delayed the SAS, for example.
Right.
There's, obviously very problematic elements that could come from that if implemented. There's some good pieces that off calf. I think they've extended that till 2027. Like there's some not terrible policies that, I'm not going to rip on the government for. But I just think it's a prime example of what's wrong with government in the sense of you're just not listening. And on the flip side of that, from our party's perspective, John Barlow, obviously a fantastic critic. This guy knows his file. He's been kind enough to bring me in on a number of conversations regarding some of our policy development. And I take the exact opposite view. I don't, I, I'd say I know the priorities. I know grain growers' priorities. You might have a couple different areas that if you come and meet with me
And
again here, but I roughly know. But that will expire. And the reason I say that is my job now in this job is to listen to guys like you and every other representative of our ag sector because you know what those priorities are. So maybe not trying to avoid answering the question because I don't see a lot of things coming towards our sector that are going to be great. But this is why, today's not the day, but it's groups like grain growers and the many others in this sector that we need to listen to because you have the answers because you're the ones in touch with farmers. I got farmers in my riding and they got ideas, but those local boards and those provincial and regional organizations, they got the pulse of the ground. And so my job is to listen to you and folks that work in your sector today, tomorrow, and hopefully when we're in government, because you guys are the ones that know. So that's what you can look forward to is trying to tell us what to do because you're going to be able to tell us a heck of a lot better than me and my Ottawa ivory tower just gonna be able to decide what I think our ag sector needs.
well, I appreciate that. And we could talk another 40 minutes about the sustainable agriculture strategy if we wanted to, but we won't dive into that. We won't get into that.
I'll
Uh,
come back for round two. How about that?
there we
You got,
go.
you got me
Well,
going, Kyle. I missed this podcasting thing. It's
absolutely.
different being asked questions, but you got me excited. I appreciate it.
A great continuance of beers with Branden, that's for sure. I had to keep the beer theme.
I love
That's
it.
that's ultra important for our barley farmers. But look, that brings us to the end of our first episode of Grains on Tap. I want to give a big thank you to our guest Branden Leslie for sharing his wealth of experience and perspectives on agriculture, politics, and of course beer. We appreciate his dedication to bridging the gap between rural and urban communities. Remember, if you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more conversations from across the country. A special thanks again to Beer Canada for making this podcast possible. Cheers to the grains on tap, and we'll catch you on the next episode.